Hello, and welcome to our presentation, The Ultimate Guide to Increasing Product Specifications Through Webinars. I'm Brad Blank, and I'll be your presenter today. Webinars are one of the most significant education and specification tools a manufacturer can have in their tool belt. I'm excited to share with you today the best strategies to increase your product specification opportunities. Let's get started. By the end of this presentation, you and your team should be able to implement a powerful and effective webinar initiative to increase brand awareness and product specification opportunities. Create an engaging continuing education webinar presentation that can educate hundreds of design professionals across the country. Achieve success by integrating webinar best practices, specification secrets, and avoiding common mistakes. And finally, increase product specification opportunities by leveraging metrics, surveys, and lead generation strategies using proven methods by the AEC industry's top experts. Before we dig into the secrets of creating the most effective webinar presentation for your company, we need to go back in time. To understand where we are today in the AEC industry, it's critical to know where we were many years ago. Webinars were born about 3 decades ago at the end of the 1980s when the internet was in its early stages, but it took until 1996 for the first public web conferences to be available through Microsoft's launch of NetMeeting. Microsoft NetMeeting was originally bundled with Internet Explorer. NetMeeting was a popular way for companies, schools, and others to perform video conferences and chat over the internet. This was in the old days of dial-up internet access. Remember those annoying screeches, hissing, and buzzing sounds that came out of your modem? Those sounds are two modems handshaking. Handshaking is the process of two modems testing the waters and negotiating settings such as which speed and compression methods to use. It could take several seconds to connect. These days, a connection is instantaneous via a fast internet connection like broadband. In 1999, WebEx Meeting Center was developed, which was later named WebEx. Over the last 20 years, new platforms launched like GoToWebinar, ClickWebinar, My Own Conference, Zoom, Google Meet, and Microsoft Teams. All of the platforms share similar features, and a few have extra bells and whistles. Platforms are important, but there are several other factors that outweigh a specific platform, as we shall see today. Our companies Ron Blank and Associates, Green CE, and CE Academy have been the industry leaders for webinars in the construction industry for over 15 years. Our team launched the first AIA online course in 2000 at the AIA National Convention before there were any platforms offering AIA online education for design professionals. We've amassed a lot of tips, hacks, secrets, and strategies to improve your specification opportunities. We've done the heavy lifting and created successful methods that you can replicate today. If you've never created a webinar, this course will bring you up to speed to develop a powerful presentation. If you've developed and delivered webinars in the past, this course can help you improve your webinar initiative and hopefully introduce new concepts your company can use. If we were to break down the core content of a successful webinar program, it would focus on 4 key items: content, the presenter, marketing and outreach, and lead generation and follow-up. We'll dive into each topic and explain how to implement the strategies into your own webinar programs to increase your chances at getting your products specified. Content is king. Content is how you connect with your customers. Content is how you educate specifiers about your products. Content helps market your products, builds name recognition and awareness, and ultimately increases your product specification opportunities. Your content must be valuable to your audience. What you say must be engaging. Your webinar should be valuable to old clients as well as new clients. Your content style, feel, and tone are important and has to connect with your audience. High-quality content helps to build brand reputation and trust, leading to more customers. Your webinar about your building products helps to lure in new customers while also keeping previous customers happy. Repeat customers are the driving force of companies, especially building product manufacturers. In addition, repeat customers are great for boosting brand loyalty and spreading positive reviews, a pleasant side effect from the content is king approach. It's important for a brand to have customers who can trust and rely on them. When you give them content that they value, their relationship with you improves. You will build loyal brand advocates and encourage sales. Content marketing is consistently proving that content is king and the conversions really speak volumes and speak for themselves. Your content is your message to specifiers. What do you want them to walk away with once the webinar has concluded? Obviously, you want them to specify your products, but what specific ideas and calls to action do you want them to implement? Not all webinars are equal. While a select few manufacturer webinars enjoy 300 participants, many have less than 100 participants over the course of an hour. Over time, many webinars become flat and generate less attendance, and there's high drop-off rates. Your webinar team must focus on creating excellent content first to achieve your specification goals. There are several important components to consider when creating content. Learning objectives. What's your message? What do you want design professionals to take away from your webinar? This will be outlined in your learning objectives and webinar description. Audience. Who is your audience? Architects, engineers, interior designers, lead professionals. Structure. Every webinar needs a strong structure, a beginning, a middle, and an end. We'll discuss this in greater detail later and offer true and tried methods for success. Story. What's your story? You need a strong narrative to engage the audience and take them from the beginning to the end. You may be discussing your products, but you should also integrate your personality into the presentation through stories about your projects, lessons learned, and case studies that you've worked on. CE course designations. Once you've identified your audience, you also need to determine which CE course designations the course should have. Most webinars will be registered with the AIA, but depending on your audience, your topic, you may want to register the course with the GBCI for lead professionals, the IDCEC for interior designers, or RCEP for engineers. Since most webinars will be registered with the AIA, we will use their requirements as the bare minimum and examples throughout this presentation. Creating a webinar is very similar to creating a face-to-face lunch and learn course or an online course. The development process is nearly identical. Every webinar should have the following. Title. Your webinar needs a catchy title that will attract design professionals. Introduction slides. Your introduction slides should contain your company logo, contact information, a headshot of the presenter, and an eye-catching image. Learning objectives and course description. These are critical not only for the audience, the design professionals, but also for the webinar registration process with the AIA, GBCI, and so on. Content. Your presentation should have a logical flow that allows design professionals to follow your lessons easily from the beginning to the end. A common and effective way to structure a webinar is to use the learning objectives as guideposts or even chapters for the whole presentation. Q&A session. Every successful webinar has a question and answer session attached to the end. We'll discuss several strategies to improve conversions and lead generation. Conclusion slide. The conclusion slide is often the most misused slide in the webinar presentation. Too often a presenter will thank the audience and then open the webinar for questions, which is great, and it's a required part of the continuing education webinar, but that shouldn't be the last part of your presentation. The conclusion slide should also be a call to action. You need to convince the design professionals to take action, whether it's downloading a free resource on your company website or answering a post-webinar survey. Webinar attendance can live or die based on a title choice, believe it or not. If you create a great presentation but have a poor title, you will suffer low attendance. The perfect title can help increase webinar registrations and attendance. A great title can create buzz on social media and increase shares on LinkedIn, Twitter, and other social media platforms. Your webinar's title is your first interaction with your audience. When they see it, they'll decide whether they're going to sign up or not. So let's look at two webinar titles for the same webinar course: Skylight and Gravity Vent Solutions and the profitability of healthy spaces, the business case for designing with light and air. Which webinar title do you think design professionals will be drawn to? Okay, here's another one. This webinar presentation is about sustainable schools and higher education. Here's the two titles: Using Copper for Education Projects and Oasis, Designing a Lead Campus in the Desert. Which course title do you think will draw in the most webinar participants? Boring, dry, and highly technical webinar titles are definitely a deterrent to getting design professionals to register for your webinar. Let's review the key components of a successful webinar title. Your title is the first thing people see, so it needs to grab their attention. It's your chance to draw in your target audience and turn people from passive viewers into engaged participants and hopefully specification leads. Here's a breakdown to inform your webinar titles. Relevant keywords. Your webinar should contain at least one keyword that defines your webinar content. This course title is engaging, catchy, and contains several keywords relevant to the presentation. Go with the flow, managing stormwater hazards through smart porous pavers. The keywords include porous pavers, stormwater, and flow. However, the way the title is arranged allows for the keywords to be integrated into a simple and catchy course title. Architects, engineers, contractors. These professionals sign up for webinars to learn about construction and design topics. Your attendees want to know what they can get out of your webinar event. Try to create a succinct, descriptive title. Look to your company's value proposition to figure out what the title could say. Your title could pose a question, a challenge, or a goal, such as how to specify windows for hospitals. Well, a better title than that is Healthy Hospitals, Successful Daylighting Strategies for Healthcare Projects. Once again, if we examine these two webinar titles, we can clearly see that they focus on the same topics, but that the last title is the more engaging webinar title. Both titles contain relevant keywords, but only one title stands out as a winner. As long as your webinar title has the relevant keywords and focuses on your key demographic, you can have fun creating titles that are a bit irreverent and bold. Here are a few course titles that exemplify the strategies we recommend. How to reach 4,000 architects without leaving your office. Don't get wet. LEED v4.1 rainwater management credit. Breath of fresh air, low emitting materials, and LEED v4.1. So how can manufacturers ensure that they have a successful title for their webinar? We recommend brainstorming 5 webinar titles, select your favorite 3 titles, and send them to various team members. Based on the responses and feedback, you should be able to pick a winner. Your introduction slides should be engaging and informative. Your image on your opening slide must be an eye-catching photo or illustration. One critical aspect of every webinar is using high-quality graphics. A webinar can be ruined by low resolution and poor quality photos of building products. Bad lighting, bad composition, blurry photos, etc. can ruin a great presentation. If you haven't hired a professional photographer to document all of your products, your factory, your manufacturing process, product installations, you need to do that immediately. The photos and video in your webinar represent your product brand, your reputation, and your standing in the AEC industry. If the images in your webinar are of poor quality, what will design professionals think about your building products? Your webinar is a reflection of you and your products. It better be great. After your amazing opening slides, you need to create compelling and effective learning objectives. After 20 years of creating education courses, our team has perfected the art of creating learning objectives. Here are common mistakes that manufacturers make and that you need to avoid. Too many objectives. A common mistake that many manufacturers make is cramming everything they want to talk about into the objectives. Sometimes I'll see a manufacturer's webinar with 6 to 8 learning objectives. That's overkill and can definitely dilute your message. The AIA, the GBCI, the IDCEC, and many other professional organizations only require 4 learning objectives. Your webinar should have 4 to 5 learning objectives at the most. Anything more is amateur hour. A learning objective is a brief statement that specifically describes what the learner will be able to perform by the end of the lesson, unit, project, or course. Learning objectives should be learner-centric and should start with language that dictates what the learner will gain from the lesson. Learning objectives should be SMART: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. You may have created AIA courses in the past and never heard of Bloom's taxonomy. You've used Bloom's taxonomy without even knowing it. Bloom's taxonomy features a hierarchy of cognitive skills that allow students to apply what they have learned. There are 6 levels of cognitive learning according to the revised version of Bloom's taxonomy. Each level is conceptually different. The 6 levels are remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Here's an example of poorly written learning objectives for a webinar on metal composite panels. 1. Learn about metal composite panels. 2. Know metal composite panel types and their component parts. 3. Apply the capabilities of metal composite. 4. Have a deep understanding of how architects can use metal composite panels. 5. Be given opportunities to learn about field-assembled panel systems. 6. Demonstrate knowledge of code-required standards. There are several problems with the learning objectives shown here. First, there are 6 learning objectives. There should never be more than 4 or 5 learning objectives for a course. That's the first big red flag. The learning objectives themselves are poorly written. For example, the first learning objective is vague. The second learning objective is unmeasurable. Most of the verbs used in these learning objectives are pretty weak. We highly recommend referencing Bloom's taxonomy to create the strongest and most effective learning objectives for your course. After the learning objectives, you build out the rest of your webinar using the objectives as guideposts or chapters. You don't have to be William Shakespeare to create an engaging and powerful webinar. You just need to follow some tried and true strategies to create a successful program. The webinar development process typically revolves around 4 methods. A single person develops the course. This method is common with smaller companies. A product rep, the sales and marketing director, or even an administration person is assigned to develop a webinar or an online course. They may have tons of experience or none at all. 2 people develop the course. In larger companies, there might be 2 people assigned to develop an education course. One person is the subject matter expert. They might be a product rep who has worked for the company for 10 years and they know the ins and outs of a building product. The second team member is usually a marketing person who has the writing and graphic skills to elevate the content. This is one of the best webinar development methods that results in pretty effective webinar programs. Committee process. This process is webinar by committee. This can be a big success or sometimes a case of too many cooks in the kitchen where everyone wants to overstuff a webinar with too many products and ideas. There should be a point person assigned for a committee process so that it can help manage the project and make decisions regarding content. Finally, there's third-party consultants and experts. They can help manufacturers navigate these issues and ensure a smoother development process. Consider hiring a webinar specialist to work with you to make sure things go smoothly as far as the planning, the promotion, the webinar itself, and everything that follows. So what should you do and what should you avoid when creating content for your webinar? Everyone here has probably experienced a bad webinar, a boring webinar, or a webinar that didn't meet your expectations. A common term in the industry is death by PowerPoint. These are bad presentations by bad presenters. You don't want to make your audience of architects, engineers, and other design professionals fall asleep. You don't want them to disengage from the webinar or even log off and quit the webinar. You and your team can deliver a great webinar if you follow some simple rules. Here are 3 simple rules for success. Don't read off your slides verbatim. Your slides should be engaging for the audience and should highlight key takeaways. You and your audience should need to read through a massive series of bullet points. Stacks of text on slides is a red flag. Keep your bullet points clear, concise, and succinct. Practice your presentation. There's no such thing as too much rehearsal. People typically only remember great speakers. The rest is quickly forgotten. Be conversational, tell stories, make it personal, and have a point of view. Don't read from a script verbatim. Use poll questions and surveys. During the presentation, you can engage with the audience by asking them questions and allowing them to send their answers. The webinar moderator can help with this process. In webinars, your audience is typically sitting by themselves at their office or at home, looking at a screen that might be on a desktop, a laptop, an iPad, or even their phone. Poll questions and surveys during the webinar make the event engaging, and the audience becomes an active participant. Professional photography. We discussed this a little bit earlier. Your company needs to use professional images for the webinar. Poor quality photos can kill a presentation. Don't use stock images unless they are super high quality. Hire a professional photographer to document your products, your factory, installations, and so on. Occasionally, I've worked with companies that have an employee who is an amateur or novice photo or video buff. Sometimes they can be a great resource by taking photos in the field and on the job site, but the bottom line is use professional photography. The end of your webinar presentation should focus on a call to action slide right after the Q&A session. Many manufacturers simply place a thank you slide at the conclusion when they wrap up their webinar. This is a wasted opportunity. You spent nearly an hour educating design professionals about your products, and you need to go out with a bang. Does your call to action include the following? Is it clear and easy to understand? Does it solve a problem? Does it create urgency? Can it be implemented immediately? Does it use numbers, stats, or metrics? If you want design professionals to specify your products, what's the next immediate step and call to action after the webinar? Encourage the architects to complete the post-webinar survey to learn more about their needs. Set up a meeting with design professionals who have a potential project for your product. Find out what your call to action is and implement it. The Q&A session is one of the most critical parts of your webinar. This is where you get to directly engage with your audience and build rapport. Here's some suggestions to improve that session. Allow design professionals to send questions via the questions or chat interface. The moderator can collect questions from the chat box and then prepare them for the Q&A session. Have seeded questions created in advance just in case any issues arise and there's less than a responsive audience. The moderator should pose questions for the presenter to answer and combine any questions that are similar. The webinar shouldn't allow audience members to unmute and ask a question. You will get hecklers from time to time, and it may get you off course and affect your timing. Later, we're going to discuss the most effective follow-up strategies after the Q&A session. We'll now discuss technical tips to ensure you deliver a great webinar to design professionals. Invest in a quality headset or microphone. Don't ever use your laptop's built-in microphone for webinars. The sound quality will be poor. A good microphone or headset can be purchased for $50 to $100. Don't go cheap and buy an inferior one for $15. It's critical that your voice sounds great, or you're going to lose your audience very quickly. Hardwire internet connection. Ideally, you would use a hardwire connection if it's available. Hardwire connections provide the best stability for a live event. However, most people use wireless these days in their homes and their office space. So if you're using a third-party webinar company to assist you, they should have a hardwired connection and a backup battery-powered internet connection for your event. Test your webinar gear. To deliver a high-quality webinar that people will remember, the experience must look and sound great. If you use a particular webinar platform, make yourself familiar with all the useful features it offers, and never use new equipment on the day of the webinar. Before a webinar, here's a short list of things you should do before the event to prevent any distractions. Mute your phone. This is a major red flag. I don't know how many of you have been on a webinar and the presenter's phone rings. I was on a webinar one time when a guy actually answered the phone and had a conversation while 100 audience members sat there. This shows a lack of respect for the design professionals, and this will surely ruin your specification opportunities. Inspect your room for anything that produces noise. If you're in your office or at your home, turn off fans, alarms, any other electronics that make noise. Be mindful of barking dogs, squeaky chairs, and other sources of noises that are not electronic. If you're in an office space, alert your coworkers to keep quiet during your webinar or make sure you're in a location with no other people. Close applications running in the background of your computer. This is another common mistake I've seen. The presenter hits a wrong button during the presentation and pictures of their trip to Cabo pop up on the screen. Multiple presenters. If you have more than one presenter or guest for the Q&A session, meet all of the speakers beforehand. Consider hosting a quick meeting that will allow you and the other webinar panelists to walk through the webinar topic and get to know each other. Okay, so there's popular webinar formats. These include single expert presenter. One expert shares their insights or tips into building products. This is probably the most common type of webinar. Dual presenters. Instead of just one presenter, you have two presenters. This helps engage and educate the audience and may allow you to share more information. A panel. Just like a live panel, you could host a group of experts to discuss a specific topic. And then finally, the interview webinar. Having a popular influencer as a guest speaker is a great way to boost attendance and engage with your audience. The professional organizations you register your webinar with will have a significant effect on your webinar attendance. Let's review some of the most popular CE Hour designations, their demographics, and tips to increase your attendance. The AIA HSW webinar. Nearly every building product manufacturer will register their webinar with the American Institute of Architects. This is typically the bare minimum for manufacturers who want to reach architects. At least 75% of the content must be on health, safety, and welfare topics. It's important to note that a webinar must be generic in nature for AIA registration. You can discuss your products, but you can't mention brand names. You must focus on the product technology, not the specific product name or show any logos. As of 2023, there are over 90,000 AIA members that need 18 hours of AIA continuing education. Nearly every state in the country mandates continuing education for architects. The AIA course designation has traditionally been the default CE hour designation for many state boards, and it's accepted by many organizations. So therefore, every building product manufacturer trying to reach architects and other design professionals should register their webinar or their online course with the American Institute of Architects. One of the most significant opportunities for building product manufacturers is lead education. There's over 200,000 lead professionals, and over 100,000 of these professionals need a lot of continuing education. There's two basic types of lead professionals. There's lead APs, which I'm sure everyone's heard of. They require 30 CE hours every 2 years. 24 hours can be GBCI general hours, and 6 hours must be lead-specific hours. Then there's green associates. They require 15 CE hours every 2 years. 12 hours can be GBCI general hours, and 3 hours must be lead-specific hours. One of the greatest specification and lead generation opportunities is sitting on this slide right now. Our team calls it the secret CE weapon, and it's the difference between having 100 webinar participants and 300 webinar participants for an event. It's the difference between having 100 design professionals take your course online and 300 take your course online every month. A GBCI General Hour course is kind of like a AIA HSW course. General CE hours are defined as activities that are relevant to general green building concepts such as environmental sustainability, human health, resiliency, and the circular economy. Typically, 3 out of the 4 learning objectives need to relate to sustainability topics, but not necessarily LEED. That's right, you don't even have to mention the LEED rating system in your presentation to obtain the GBCI General Hour designation and reach over 100,000 LEED professionals. GBCI General Hour courses perform better than strictly AIA-only courses. An AIA HSW GBCI General Hour webinar is a winner and will attract a large group of design professionals. The CE course secret weapon is the lead specific hour. This is one of the most sought after CE courses in the construction industry and generates the highest traffic and leads for building product manufacturers. On average, an online course with the lead specific hour designation has 250 to 300 design professionals taking that course monthly. For some months, these lead specific hour online courses can generate even 400 or more completions per month. If you've been in the AEC industry for a while, you may even be shocked hearing these numbers, which are 3 to 4 times the normal average. It's shocking, almost unthinkable, and exceptional. A lead specific hour webinar will generally produce anywhere from 250 or more participants per webinar compared to a normal AIA webinar. So what does it take for a manufacturer to create a webinar on steroids? There are only about a dozen lead specific hour courses developed by manufacturers. That's right. The majority of these courses are on the Green CE website. Typically, a lead AP or a lead GA will pay $50 an hour or more to take a course or webinar. That's why manufacturers who develop these courses and they offer them for free will get significant traffic, leads, and specification opportunities. To qualify for the lead specific hour designation, a course must meet a few key requirements. 3/4 of the learning objectives must be lead rating system specific. The course or webinar specifies the rating systems and version discussed at least once in the course title, the description, or the learning objectives. For lead courses, the lead specialty needs to be included, such as BD&C, ID&C, and O&M. And the webinar must teach the current version of the rating system. Although a product manufacturer may have a lead AP on staff that can assist with course development, typically lead-specific hour courses are developed by a qualified third party, such as Green CE or Elixir Environmental. Then the webinar can be delivered by your product reps and receive massive attendance and lead generation. This is the highest performing CE course in the AEC industry. Our team has created several lead-specific hour courses for Toto, GROE, the Copper Development Association, Big Ass Fans, and other successful manufacturers who gain significant market share through this effective strategy. Okay, here's some additional CE hour designations that product manufacturers may consider when registering their webinar. The IDCEC, this is the International Design Continuing Education Council. They serve as the primary education approval and registration services for interior designers. The RCEP, the Registered Continuing Education Providers Program, is a nationwide registry of continuing education providers that have demonstrated adherence to high quality, effective practices in the development and delivery of professional activities and education for engineers and surveyors. There's the AIBD, the American Institute of Building Design. This represents how homes are designed in America. The AIBD members must have 8 hours of CE annually. WELL is one of the fastest growing green rating systems in the country with large-scale commercial projects coast to coast. WELL APs have similar CE requirements as lead APs. They need 30 hours of CE every 2 years. If you have a interior-based product, this might be a good fit for your CE course or webinar. ADA. If your product is related to accessibility, then you may consider developing an ADA-related course. California, Texas, and other parts of the country require ADA courses for the licensing of architects. California architects are required to obtain 5 ADA hours, which can provide really great specification opportunities for building product manufacturers. You may create the best webinar presentation in the world, but what happens if nobody shows up? We've worked with many manufacturers who created awesome webinars but lacked the resources to drive traffic to the webinar registration pages. Getting people to your webinar may be one of the biggest challenges your company faces. That's why it's good to partner up with a third-party webinar specialist like Ron Blank or Green CE to drive attendance to your event. So let's look at some other ways manufacturers can help drive webinar participation. Research has shown that 11 a.m. is the most successful time to host a webinar. Early afternoon is also an effective time. Manufacturers should keep time zones in mind and plan their webinars accordingly. There's a balancing act in trying to find webinar times that cater to both the East Coast and the West Coast. Manufacturers should avoid hosting webinars after 5 p.m., as that's generally too late for most design professionals. Driving traffic to your webinar should include multiple strategies. An effective outreach program should include the following: an email campaign. Your marketing team should email announcements about their webinar to your database of design professionals. Existing customers should be alerted that there's a new webinar event on the horizon and to sign up. Keep the email short, concise, and make it easy for people to register. Social media. A very effective way to promote your webinar event is through social media like LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and other platforms. Advertising the webinar event and LinkedIn user groups can help drive traffic and bring in new design professionals who may not be in your current database. Partner with organizations. Another effective strategy to drive traffic is to partner with another organization. For example, if you partner with your local AIA chapter or a USGBC chapter, you can increase the number of attendees that are participating in your webinar. Once you host your awesome webinar presentation and educate design professionals about your amazing building products, it's time for follow-up. Follow-up is one of the most important aspects of a webinar and also a way to increase product specification. Immediately after your Q&A session, you should encourage design professionals to take a post-webinar survey. Platforms like GoToWebinar have surveys built into their platform. A post-webinar survey separates the amateurs from the experts. Let's take a closer look. A common mistake that some manufacturers make is failing to fully utilize a webinar platform's capabilities. We discussed integrating polls into your webinar to make it more engaging and allowing design professionals to ask questions via the questions area or the chat box. However, the post-webinar survey might be one of the most powerful tools in your arsenal. Our team recommends creating a survey to collect more information from the architects, engineers, and design professionals, and use this information to build a relationship with an AEC firm to increase product specification opportunities. Now, many manufacturers don't develop post-webinar surveys and rely only on the webinar participation report with the names and contact information, which they send a follow-up email. This is definitely a missed opportunity. A post-webinar survey should ask the design professional a series of questions that indicates their interest in your building products and, more importantly, identifies potential projects for your team. Here are questions that you can ask webinar attendees. Do you have a current project where you could specify this building product? What types of projects could you specify this product for? What are solutions that this building product offers your project team? Would your office like a more in-depth discussion about the solutions we offer? How can we further help your team with the challenges you may face on a project? These are not your standard webinar questions. These questions are designed to encourage interaction with the design professional, collect critical data, and increase your product specification opportunities. Our webinar team has found that up to 50 to 60% of the webinar attendees will fill out the post-webinar survey. Manufacturers don't have a lot of time to spend chasing down mediocre leads. By creating results-focused questions, your team can save time and focus on the hottest leads generated from the post-webinar survey. Design professionals who confirm they would specify your product for a current project or want you to visit their office should be at the top of your follow-up list. The survey questions offer you information that you can use to provide a personalized follow-up for the design professionals. If you're not active about keeping the conversation alive and going with design professionals, you're going to lose your chance at getting your product specified. After the webinar, follow up with participants by sending them additional content. For example, you could send the participants a thank you email that includes a link to the recorded webinar, download links for your product brochures and specifications, and information about future webinar events. Now that you have an understanding of how to host a successful and effective webinar event, let's review strategies for the long term. How do you build off one event and increase your product specification opportunities? Our team has a motto: Out of sight is out of mind. If a design professional doesn't see your brand, receive valuable education from your company, and build relationships with you and your team, then you will have a very difficult time getting your products specified. Building product manufacturers can increase their education and specification opportunities by implementing a long-term plan. Ideally, a manufacturer will have a minimum of 2 webinars on hand to rotate during a given year. 3 to 4 different webinar presentations are preferable, but 2 should be the bare minimum. So here's a basic webinar plan that a manufacturer could implement. This is over a 12-month period. The first quarter is webinar A and webinar B. Second quarter, webinar A, webinar B. Third quarter, webinar A, webinar B, and so forth for the fourth quarter. As we can see, the basic plan offers 2 webinars per quarter. This gets your message out to the design professionals. It keeps you in front of the decision makers. It puts pressure on your competitors, and it increases your specification opportunities. A more powerful and effective approach is to host 3 to 4 different webinar presentations during the year. They can all focus on different topics about your products. So over a 12-month period, we got the first quarter, we have webinar A and then webinar B. Second quarter, webinar C and webinar D. Third quarter, webinar A and webinar B, and fourth quarter, webinar C and webinar D. This schedule allows a lot more flexibility and variety. Manufacturers who use a program like this will have more webinar participants during the year, and they're going to have a lot more specification opportunities. It is crucial that manufacturers refresh their webinar content annually. Typically, AIA, GBCI, and other professional organizations mandate that a CE course is updated every 3 years and it expires after that. Webinars are different than online anytime courses. You may be able to extend an online anytime course's life for 2 to 3 years. Participation is strong from the beginning and eventually slows to a trickle over the course of many years. Webinars are a little bit different than that. Manufacturers should update their webinars annually by adding new content, renaming them, and re-registering these with the professional organizations we mentioned. So let's review best practices for your next webinar. Create great content. Invent a catchy title. Develop robust learning objectives. Use professional photography. Integrate polls and questions into the webinar. Develop a call to action. And create backup Q&A questions for the moderator. Rehearse your presentation. Invest in a quality microphone or headset. Register your webinar for high-performing CE hours. Select a day and a time that generates tons of attendees. Schedule several different webinars over the course of a year. Develop a results-oriented post-webinar survey. Follow-up is critical to getting your product specified, and collaborate with a third-party consultant or expert team to ensure your success. Our team has developed the most successful webinar program in the construction industry. We spent the last 15 years perfecting our methods of using webinars and online courses to reach and influence design professionals. Today, we've shared with you many of the secrets we've learned, what you should do, and what your team should avoid. Your call to action is develop an effective webinar presentation to reach as many design professionals as possible to increase your product specification opportunities. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you soon.